Welcome to Mind Meets Body and Soul, a podcast that connects the dots between clinical mental health and spiritual holistic wellness. I'm Heather, a licensed clinical social worker and mental health guru.
And I'm Devon, a Reiki master, spiritual teacher, and lover of all things woo-woo. We're here to discuss various wellness topics, highlighting the connection between the mind, body, and soul.
We'll be offering nuggets of wisdom from each of our fields with the ultimate goal of bridging the gap between our two worlds. Whether you lean more into cognitive psychology
or flow with the woo-woo waters, our intention is to help you prioritize yourself and unlock a fresh perspective to healing, growth, and expansion. We're so excited you're here. Let's jump in. Hello. Welcome back, everyone. Episode 11 of Mind Meets Body and Soul. We are so happy to be here. As always, this is Devon and here with my co-host.
Hi, everybody. Heather here.
How are you doing, Heather?
I'm good. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good. We kind of just jumped right on this recording, so I didn't even get a chance to ask you like how you're doing and what's been going on. You said you just came from a social event, a co-working,
it was
networking event.
Yeah, it was like a networking event. You got it.
Got it. Well, you made it just in time for our recording. Happy to be here for another episode. I wanted to start off this episode with a quick, fun synchronicity that I think you and I and our audience hopefully will laugh over. So, for those of you who have tuned into our prior episodes, there was one episode where at the end, Heather had looked up at her vision board and there was a piece of paper, elephant poop paper, that said, "Think happy, not crappy." And we were laughing because I was like, what is elephant poop paper? It didn't make any sense to me. Lo and behold, here on my desk, I have an elephant poop paper notebook. Quick story behind that. A few days, weeks maybe after that recording, I was in Boulder and I was walking around looking for a card for my friend's mom who was hosting me. Walk into this fair trade store, pick out this card that I'm going to get for her. Wanted to get something else because I didn't want to be that person that's putting a $3 card on a credit card. So I'm looking for something for myself. I see a bunch of journals. I'm like, ooh, I could use a journal. And I'm looking through, and this is a fair trade store. So everything is like eco-friendly, made of sustainable material. We love that. And the first thing that drew my attention was this notebook. One, because it had an elephant on it, and elephants are my favorite animals. Two, because it also had mountains, and I love the mountains. And then knowing that it was sustainably sourced, eco-friendly, I pick it up, and wouldn't you know, it is made of elephant poop. So I have my own elephant poop notebook, and I can't make fun of you now for it.
Right. That was very shortly after we had that conversation, and it's like a wild thing because it's not common. Like, you literally hadn't even ever heard of it before, and I hadn't until I got this gift from my old supervisor. So it's pretty wild that now you are the proud owner of an elephant poop paper notebook. That's a mouthful.
And if you heard us talking about it on a past episode, if you're hearing it now, maybe it's your sign to keep your eye out for some elephant poop paper too. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to use this opportunity, this synchronicity, as a way to lead into this topic, this more expansive topic of spirituality and the spiritual journey. And I know for those of you who have listened from the very start or who have listened to that first episode, Heather, you and I have chatted about what brought us together. And it was you coming from your clinical psychology world and seeing or having an interest in the more holistic spiritual world, wanting to kind of dip your toes and see what's over there, that you then connected with me. And so that's how our whole relationship started. And at the time, you had mentioned that what interested you so much about the spiritual world was that it was so fun, right? Like, you were starting to open your eyes and see the repeating numbers, the angel numbers, and the little signs and synchronicities like we just talked about with this elephant poop paper. And in that episode, you suggested, but I'm sure that there's so much more to it. And that's what I would really like to get into today.
I love that. I'm very excited to learn more about it. I think like as I get older, I find myself more and more curious and like a little nerdy. Like I want to know everything. And I think that's probably part of why I became a therapist because everybody tells me everything. But I'm definitely really curious because I know it's deeper than like me just seeing 333 or us getting on this call at 11:11 and the elephant poop paper stuff. Like I know that there's more to it because I even hear in conversations with clients them allude to their gut feeling or their intuition, or I know people talk about like vibing with other people, and I think they're like we've talked about the law of resonance. So I'm definitely very curious and super excited for you to actually be teaching me and our audience all of the good things you're going to teach us today.
Awesome. And I know when I say we're going to center a conversation around spirituality, there's a part of you that may be like, okay, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to have to add to this because I'm not well versed in the spiritual journey, right? But the purpose of this conversation is to make it accessible, attainable, relatable for everyone. And that's why I love that I'm here having this conversation with you, because I am confident that the moment we get into this conversation and I start speaking about experiences that are considered to be spiritual, you're going to come in with your mental health therapist perspective and be like, oh yeah, and here's the clinical tie-in, or here's where this applies either in my personal life or in the lives of my clients. So I know that there's so much bridging the gap here that we're going to be able to do with this conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'll share anything. I think that's been the cool part about this podcast is that you always have things to say that I can process and understand from some clinical lens or world. So there's obviously connections here. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say and then connect those dots.
Likewise, I always learn from you too. So I wanted to pull up first, just, start off with the dictionary definition of spirituality and then kind of break down what, when people say that they have a spiritual awakening, what that really means. And again, I mean that or I'm going to relay that in a very tangible, accessible, relatable way. I know best how to do that through my own experiences. And I would love for you to take this time to reflect also and think about how you have had your own spiritual awakening in one way or another. And then also how we see that in the work that we do with our clients. So, starting
Sure.
there, spirituality is defined as the quality of being concerned with the human spirit or soul as opposed to material or physical things. And if I shared my own personal definition or belief around what spirituality is, it is simply our awareness of our existence and connection to ourselves and to others and to all that is. So it's simply being aware that you are not going through life hustling about and like it's not all about you, right? It's also about your connection to other people, how you interact with other people, plants, animals, and how your daily thoughts, feelings, actions have an impact on everything around you.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. And we talked about that in a previous episode that like the spiritual component is that connection.
Yeah, and we came onto this podcast. I mean, our intro is about me being a lover of all things woo woo, and I do. There are parts to the spiritual journey, the spiritual world that are seemingly woo woo. And by that, I don't necessarily mean like make believe type things. Like these spiritual teachings are ancient teachings, they've existed even longer than some of the science and the clinical stuff. So in this episode, I really aim to make this information less woo woo, meaning less foreign, and again, as I said, more attainable, more relatable. So, as I mentioned, the first part of this episode is to explore what a spiritual awakening is when somebody says they go through a spiritual awakening. And what I've found through my own journey, what I find through my clients' journey is that a spiritual awakening is simply just like a either gradual or sometimes it feels like a push off the cliff moment in your life or moments in your life where you start to realize that, okay, wow, there's more to this life than me just waking up, working 9 to 5, getting home, eating, going to sleep, lather, rinse, repeat, right? There's more to it because not only does that feel super unfulfilling, I'm also feeling drained and I want more. And I think that that's
Mhm.
the thought or the desire, that desire for more, that kind of kicks us into our spiritual awakening, spiritual journey. Can you relate to that sort of feeling or experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I'm thinking about is like this lather, rinse, repeat is like our autopilot. So life is boring. We're just kind of going through the motions. And what we get to a point, like you said, whether that's gradually or like we just like have this eye-opening experience where we're like, I want more. I want deeper. It's making me think of like the stereotypical like finance person that like up and quits their job and like backpacks across the country because they're like, I'm done. Like I'm checked out, and that's that like instant like eye-opening experience. But I think it's this like urge or desire for something deeper, something more. And that can come, what you're saying, from this like connection inward, but also to like the world around us.
And I love that you just use the word autopilot there because I think that's exactly what it is. It's the moment when you realize that you've been on autopilot and you don't want to be on autopilot anymore, right? It's the moment that you become conscious of that, that is spiritual awareness right there. Most of our lives in the beginning, in the former years, like the first, I would say 20, I don't know, you can bring in your clinical psychology input in here too, like probably the first 25 years of our lives, we're on a very straight and narrow path. For those of us who follow a more, traditional path, everything's kind of laid out for us. Grade school, high school, college, job, and in traditional ways, you meet a partner, you get married, you buy a house, you have a kid, right? Would you say
Mm-hmm.
in psychology terms that up until probably 25, that it's a very like, I don't know, like everybody's kind of traveling in the same way, the brain develops in the same, in pretty much the same way?
Yeah, our brains actually start to fully develop at 25. Prior to 25, we don't even have a fully developed brain. So it's interesting that you said that number. But I think developmentally, I know that we know research has told us we're all on this same path. And then we hit this point. Society also kind of tells us this is the path, like you're saying, if you're following this more traditional life route, at least here in this country, that's what, life looks like. And then at 25, people start to take a different path or different route. Things start to mix up a little bit.
I had this visual when I had turned somewhere around 25 too, where it was like kind of like a panic moment because it was like it feels like everybody's traveling the same direction, downstream, right? And then somewhere along the lines, and it's not like it's officially decided, it's just all of a sudden it seems like people are branching off. And so I noticed myself, I noticed other friends, and now clients. It's when people start branching off that all of a sudden you feel like you're not in the right place, right? Because your friend's over here one way, and then your one friend is over here, and then somebody on Instagram is somewhere over here, and they're at the same age, and all of a sudden you realize, holy shit, we're not all traveling in the same direction now. Where the heck do I go? It's like a fish, like who's, I don't know, lost its school and is like, I have no idea. And now I'm like kind of floundering about, like, I have no idea which direction to go. And that happens typically around, as you said, 25, when our brain is now fully formed and we start having to make decisions for ourselves.
I had this visual like we're all traveling down the river, and then the river at 25 like opens up to the ocean, and they're like, all right, have at it, like
Yeah.
enjoy. And it's like, well, where am I going? And like, what do I
Yep.
do?
And for many people, that's a really like unsettling thing because we haven't had to make that many individual or personal choices up until that point. You know what I mean? Like in terms of the big
Mm-hmm.
things. Like now we're all of a sudden we're deciding, like, do I stay with the employer who my first job was with? Do I stay in this city? Do I go to a completely different city? Um, I'm thinking about marriage now. So there's a lot that comes with those later 20s. And astrologically, we have something that's called the Saturn return. Have you heard of Saturn return?
No.
So, Saturn return is like an astrological rite of passage, right? So, we have all these rites of passage throughout growing up. Like, you turn 18, you get your driver's license. You turn 21, you can drink alcohol, like those kinds of rites of passage. And there is actually an astrological rite of passage that you hit somewhere between 27 to 30. And it's usually like a 3-year transit. The reason for that is because at the time that you are born, Saturn is in a specific sign. And then it takes around 27 years for Saturn to come back to return back to that sign that it was in when you were born.
Hmm.
And it happens 3 times throughout your life. So it'll happen somewhere between 27 and 30. And then it'll happen again another, nearly 30, 27, 30 years later. And then again, nearly another 27 to 30 years later, if you're fortunate enough to live that old. And each time you hit that period in your life, that Saturn return marks kind of like a big spiritual awakening for you. And so if you can think about where you were in 27 to 30, you were likely contemplating a lot more in your life. I'll speak for myself. I know that at 27 years old, I thought that I was like at the peak of my life. Like I felt like I had everything figured out. My dream job, I was in my dream apartment. I had amazing friends and support from family. And then on top of that, in came a romantic partnership as well. So 27 years old, I was like, I have it all. There is nothing else that I want. I remember even saying, like, I don't even want or need any more friends. I only want what I have right now. And then, boom, without my knowledge, Saturn return hits. My Saturn is in Aquarius, and Saturn return hits without my knowing. I had no idea anything about this spiritual world 3 years ago. But all of a sudden, it was like things started just kind of slipping through my fingertips. And then, on top of that, that over the next 3 years, I was in a place of like, I used to want XYZ, and now I don't even want that anymore. Or I want something different, or I want something more. That is the spiritual awakening. That is the spiritual journey. That is your Saturn return.
That's really interesting because I do think that like a lot happens in that 20, like late 20s range. Friendships are changing. And I've always chalked it up to like everyone's taking different paths now. So like your life and the things that you're like working on aren't like necessarily aligned anymore. But I think that's really interesting to think like that there's this larger thing that's at play. Would you say, I'm curious, that is it like disruptive? Is it something that helps us settle more into or like ground ourselves and like anchor into who we are going to be? Like maybe there's not a one answer there.
So, yes, the planet of Saturn is very disruptive, but for good reason. It asks the question, where are you right now? And is this where you really want to be? Is this where you're really meant to be? Right? Because we're all here for unique purposes with our own set of skills, talents, gifts, and our own paths. And up until this point, we've all been traveling on the same path. So now comes the question of, okay, what do you actually want? And are the people in your life, is the environment that you're in, the job that you have, are those all actually contributing to your purpose, your path? And for most of us, that answer is no, or I don't know. And so we kind of get thrown into like this riptide of our Saturn return or of our spiritual journey. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Is there a way to pinpoint like when your Saturn in return will or did happen? Like I'm curious, I want to look back because I'm thinking about things that like did happen and I actually like uprooted my life. Out. I moved to Philly with Nick. I was living in North Jersey at the time. Like I totally switched jobs and all of that did set me up. I don't think I'd be living the life I'm living. I wouldn't have the business that I have now if I hadn't done all of those things. And I'm curious if like that's the time frame it happened in.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, it really typically happens somewhere when we hit 27 to 30. There are exceptions. Like right now, Saturn is in Pisces, and it does include this next three set, these people who are now currently somewhere between 27 to 30. But there are exceptions. Like I know I was born in December of 92. And so Saturn in Aquarius, people that are born likely between, I think, somewhere in 91 to 93 have their Saturn in Aquarius. For those who are born in now like 90, somewhere 93 to 95, probably have their Saturn in Pisces. However, there is an exception because there's like a window of people who were born in, I think it's like May to June of 93 who do have their Saturn in Pisces too. I'm not an astrologer. I don't quite understand all of it, but I would implore any of you to look up where Saturn is in your chart. And for anybody that is my age, 30, Heather, you are 31.
Yeah, turning
We
32 very soon.
turning 32. We likely have together Saturn in Aquarius.
Okay, interesting.
And that's why you see like people are moving out, people are moving across, to a different city. I left my job. I started my business. I am getting ready to move. And all of this happened literally within my Saturn return, ages 27 to 30 years old. So not having the awareness of what even Saturn return meant until I was at the end of it, it was like it was really cool for me to look back and be like, holy shit, I navigated that period all on my own. I mean, getting again tossed and tumbled in the riptide of it all. And like, I think the hardest part about this time of our lives too is that we try to hold on so tightly to the things that we really want or the things that we think we want. But it's like I mentioned in an earlier episode, when there is resistance, it's a time to take a step back, reevaluate, maybe turn in a different direction. And sometimes you find that like when you let go, it opens you up for something even greater. Like you said, friendships change, right? So the friendships are really hard to let go of. But you find that some friendships, relationships aren't serving you anymore, or you've outgrown them, and that's okay. And when you let go, you come to that understanding.
Yeah. Very interesting stuff here.
Very interesting stuff. And I hope that it's, illuminating for many who are going through it right now. And with that, too, I kind of wanted to transition into some of the harder parts or the darker parts of spirituality and the spiritual journey. There's a term in the spiritual world called a dark night of the soul. And you hear it. And for those that aren't in the spiritual world, you're like, what the heck is that? I don't want that. That sounds really scary. But what I would like to ask you, for somebody who works with clients who are in that later 20s, early 30s, or even just in some transitory period in their life, and you tend to see a lot of like anxiety and a lot of depression, what does that look like in the clinical world? Like, what is depression?
So there's various different types of depression. The actual depression diagnosis is MDD, so it's major depressive disorder. And when you're diagnosing depression, we're looking at like a variety of different factors. Sometimes it's episodic, and what that means is like it's in a single episode that like something triggered it, or they're just like something's happening that's causing this episode of depression. And then sometimes it's something that's like recurring where this is just maybe a chemical thing for this person, or this is just kind of like part of their life. And then within, whether it's episodic or recurring, this is so clinical sounding, there's mild, moderate, and severe. So you're also identifying the severity or the impact, how impactful it is on a person. I describe depression to my clients a lot of times as like a wet blanket. It's just this heavy thing that coats and kind of covers all areas of our lives. It makes things really hard for us to do. It makes us really tired. It makes us feel really low and lethargic and icky and just bad, guilty. There's a lot of shame that comes with depression. So it's a lot of things. But the wet blanket analogy, I think, resonates with a lot of people because they're like, I just feel like there's this like heavy, wet thing holding me back or keeping me stuck. I don't know if that answers your question.
Completely, yes. And I think that this is an important conversation to have. We just came from Mental Health Awareness Month. Really, I think every month is or can be Mental Health Awareness Month. So I think a perfectly timed conversation. And I love the analogy that you use or the visual that you use of a wet blanket, right? Because you said in those depressive states, it's very heavy. There's usually like an inability to get up, to get out of bed sometimes even. And I've described this on the energetic level because everything vibrates at a frequency. All of our thoughts, all of our feelings are simply just energies. And so when you're in those depressive states, those lower vibrating states, the waves of the frequency of those emotions, the vibrational frequency of your emotions are very slow moving, very dense, very heavy, which is why it's harder for us to get out of those times. And my point in asking you about this and connecting it to the dark night of the soul is not at all to invalidate depression in the clinical way that it is diagnosed or described, but rather to offer a like, what if this? You know, what if we were able to reframe part of depression and think of it as being this dark night of the soul? And I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts on this. The way that I understand the dark night of the soul is how I understand depression to appear in, like, I'll use myself as an example. For me, it's been in those moments where I haven't been able to understand why I'm feeling the way I am. I haven't been able to put it into words. Why the things that I've wanted my whole life are not the things that I want now. Why life is happening or changing at a pace that I'm not keeping up with and that I'm not comfortable for. And then also that, like, I want more. Why do I want more? I'm kind of shaming myself for wanting more. The dark night of the soul is simply a reflection period or like an invitation for you to go within in your like hibernation or hidey hole and to be with those thoughts. And that's really scary. And that's why in the spiritual world, people find that time period, and it happens many times, you know, why people find that time period to be so debilitating, confusing, frustrating, because we don't have any words for it. It's not a time that we can really explain and put into words as much because it's meant to be a very introspective period, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Did you ever see the documentary? It's fairly new that Jonah Hill put out about his therapist called Stutz.
I love that documentary.
Okay. So I'll explain briefly for the listeners who may or may not have seen that, but his therapist Stutz talks about shadow work. And that's what's coming to mind for me now is that, like, we all have this shadow, Stutz calls it, and it's this like part of ourselves that we label to be ugly, or the parts of ourselves we don't like. It's like we kind of almost keep this character or this version of ourselves hidden away from other people, locked away. We try to hide it, we try to like suppress it, but it's some of our core feelings about ourselves or some of our deepest insecurities, fears, concerns. And I think shadow work is really important because, exactly like you're saying, we have to go back. It almost reminds me even of inner child work, where like we have to make sure that we're going inward and we're keeping all of ourselves, or all the versions of ourselves, or all the things we feel about ourselves, like not in check, but like together. Like we want to have our inner child with us and take care of her all the time. We want to go befriend that shadow and teach them, like, it's okay that we feel this way. It doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean that it's our reality, but like kind of like doing that work to heal and befriend our shadow, doing that work to keep our inner child here with us. I think like that's what I'm thinking of, is like the shadow work.
I love that documentary. After we watched that, my friends were like saying how it felt like tens of thousands of dollars of therapy in a 90-minute period or however long the documentary
Mm-hmm.
is. And I agree with you that shadow work is simply, I shouldn't say simply because it's not simple at all, but it's about meeting all of the parts of you that in the past you have suppressed or covered up or pushed onwards from, because we're not taught to be with them, right? Like we see life as being very linear and very, okay, eyes ahead, whether it's climbing a mountain or walking up a set of stairs or just simply getting from point A to point B. That's where, that's how we view life. And as you and I have mentioned before, if you're not taking that time to look backwards and to reflect, then you're just never going to feel satisfied with where you're heading. I think life is actually more like a spiral, right? Where sometimes you're in the same loop. And then once you hit that full, that full circle moment, then you kind of start moving up to the next circle or the next phase in your life. And then you keep moving around and up. And every time you get around that circle, like that's like an invitation for you. And you can think of it, I guess, maybe as like the years of your lives. You're just going around in a circle and there's different parts of the circle. And once you reach that birthday again, or like that beginning point, it's like an invitation to reflect, okay, how long, how far have I journeyed? What's happened during that time? What am I releasing? What am I taking with me? Or what am I calling in again? And I think that that's really hard for people who don't have the awareness, don't have the resources to understand that that's what's going on. And instead, you get trapped in the density of it, in the lower vibration of it.
Yeah, I think people also like the idea of the linear life because we can keep going, we can like run, we can leave things behind us. Whereas this like circular concept feels like less progress, where if we're going like around and around, we can't look behind us and be like, well, that's part of the past, like I'm moving on from it. But what I like about what you're saying about this circular idea is that it actually gives us, which I see as an opportunity, every like birthday or every year we have the opportunity, like, do I want to level up and advance and like elevate my circle, or do I want to go back and like, even though I've been on this loop before, is there anything left unsaid or unlearned? Like, it's okay to go around and around and around if we're doing healing, if we're doing work on that loop. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else, but like, I don't know. That's just something I was thinking about when you were explaining like the linear path versus like the loop. Like the loop is good because it gives you the opportunity to revisit and go back and find that shadow or the dark night of the soul and like connect with yourself in a way that's like from your core. That's like that inner work.
Yeah. No, I love the way that you describe that. And yes, being in that loop is not necessarily a bad thing. However, if you feel that you're in the loop and you can't get out, which most of us do, we get caught in that loop, then it's really that invitation or that moment for us to be like, oh shit, I'm stuck in that loop. How do I get out?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I know that you have your many tools then for how you get out of that loop, and I would love to explore those too, and then also make that connection because I think to some of the more spiritual teachings, because I think that there is a lot of power in taking the mental health, clinical psychology perspective and adding it with the spiritual, because why not have it all, right? Like why not have all the tools and all the resources, and then this way as we wrap up, our audience can pick out what resonates with them and give it a try. See what works for you. Nothing that you, Heather, or me, Devon, that I'm saying is like 100% like you should do this and all of this. Find what works for you. So, for those who do find themselves in that loop, sometimes what you would consider to be in a depressive state, what is some of the mental health support that you provide or offer? Or, I'm sorry, what
I
are some of the mental health tools that you suggest?
There's a lot. And like you said, it's not one size fits all. So I would really be exploring with that person, like, what are some of the things that are keeping you stuck? Whether that's behaviors, whether that's thoughts, whether those are feelings. And we really would like look inward and process those. I think there's probably things keeping this person on this loop. There's things that's telling me that like there's things that are unresolved, or they're just not ready, not by choice, not that they don't want to level up or advance or get off that merry-go-round, but there's something somewhere that's keeping them stuck. So they come to therapy, and I always say therapy is a great way to like lay it all out on the table, kind of like unpack all that stuff. And then we'll go through it and see what are some stuck points. You've talked before too, like if you keep hitting the same resistance, maybe we have to back up and try something different. So I think it's really just like looking inward and trying to see like what is keeping me stuck, and where can I try to make change and kind of meet myself where I'm at. I think a lot of it is like coming back and like even processing and giving yourself the grace that like it's okay that I'm stuck on this loop, instead of trying to jump into like problem solving mode and change it or fix it. It's like, this is where I am. What's keeping me here?
Ah, so beautiful, Heather. Thank you so much. Yes, please find yourself a therapist, a coach, a healer, somebody that can help you, because there's nothing worse than feeling like you're going through this process, this journey alone. And I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing that we get caught up in too, is like we feel like we are so alone in our experiences, and like nobody's going to, to understand. And I hope, I know, as Heather, you just beautifully explained all of that's going to resonate with so many. So thank you.
How about you, Devon? What does this look like in your lane or in your world in working with clients?
So, coming back to the definition of spirituality and my definition of spirituality, bringing that awareness not only to your existence, but also to your connection to those around you. And having that spiritual awareness, you understand that you are not alone in your experiences, that we are all more or less similar to one another, connected to one another. We started this conversation by laughing over the elephant poop paper. That was a synchronicity, right? That was something that occurred that connected you and me, that made us realize, like, holy shit, no pun intended, you know, you have this elephant poop paper, we're laughing about it. And then lo and behold, I happen to stumble into a store and buy myself some elephant poop paper. That little experience, yes, funny, but it also just makes me feel like connected to you in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise, right? So there's that kind
Yeah.
of fun synchronicity. The other thing that we talk about are the angel numbers. Yours, you said you like 333, and I love all of the angel numbers. We tend to search for their meaning and want to know what they mean. I personally think that they have different meanings for every one of us, and that the meaning that you put into it is, unique and personal to you. The point of seeing those numbers and paying attention to those numbers is that they can serve as guidelines from whoever, universe, God, spirit, whatever you choose to connect with, that just kind of gives you a little bit of like affirmation or nudge of like, ooh, yay, I'm headed in the right direction for me, or ooh, yay, something cool is coming about for me, whatever it means for you. I think, to sum up, the more that we can open our eyes and bring our awareness to the fact that we are all so interconnected, we are all experiencing life on our own pace in our own ways, but there are so many parallels. As you and I just experienced today, you're coming at this work from your clinical psychological perspective. I'm coming at it from my spiritual energetics perspective. And yet, is there really a difference? There's more similarity than
Mm-hmm.
differences, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just reminding me to like get out of that autopilot, touch down, open your eyes, look around, like connect with yourself, connect with the universe, connect with your plants, connect with earth, like whatever it is, like just open your eyes and like connect, like touch back down.
Exactly. How do you feel now that we are at the end of this episode and we've had this, 40-minute conversation without needing to stop?
It's so cool. I mean, this is like what I've been hoping to get. This was a piece of what I was hoping to get out of this podcast, is like learning from you and then being able to like digest and process that information and how I know to, or now in how I know how to. And it's really cool. It's exciting. It makes your world make a lot more sense to me. Like, not that it didn't make sense, but I have a deeper understanding now, more than just the synchronicities, more than just the angel numbers. Like, I think there's a lot here that my world and your world are really very much like mirrors to each other. And it's just a matter of like how we want to go about doing that healing work and accessing that information for ourselves. And personally, like as the therapist in the conversation, I like both. I want some of this more woo-woo stuff, as you've said, because it actually explains some of the things that I don't have the words or the knowledge to be able to understand. So it's really cool. And I thank you for teaching us this and sharing all of this. And I'm excited to learn more.
Of course. And I love, again, making these teachings or this knowledge, both your world and my world, attainable and accessible and relatable for hopefully anybody who's watching it.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I'm excited. I think that this is just further evidence of how important these conversations are. So I think we'll wrap this one up.
Yep.
And Devon, it's your turn, I think, this week to take a look at your vision board and tell us what it is that's calling out to you today.
So I felt like I wanted to have both my personal and my business vision board up today. And the first thing I'm looking at, it's like right in the corner of my personal vision board. And it says, "The light shines from within."
Mm.
I love that. As we've been talking about a dark night of the soul and depression, very dark states, there's always a light in there, and it's always just
Mm-hmm.
waiting to be brought to surface. And by bringing our awareness to it, we shine that light on it, and we come to a greater sense of clarity, spiritual awareness, joy, whatever it is for you.
Beautiful. I love it. And I'm excited to see our light shine, and our audience, same thing. I will include a Q&A, and we'll include some sort of poll or something about the topic, to be determined what the question will be. But if you're listening on Spotify, we'd love to hear what you think. We'd love to hear about your light shining. And, we'd love to see you guys connect with us more on social, through email, in these polls and questions. So
And just a
wonderful,
brief
Devon.
reminder
Thank
that
you.
next week we have our second expert guest podcast episode, and then the week after that we're doing a Q&A. So if you've listened to this episode and you have some questions, we would love to hear them. Drop them in the Spotify Q&A poll through DM or through email, mindmeetsbodyandsoul or mindmeetsbodyandsoul@gmail.com.
Yay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. See you next week.
Bye. We're so glad that you took the time to share this space with us. We'll be releasing new episodes of Mind Meets Body and Soul every Tuesday, so be sure to give us a follow and share this podcast with those you love.
To connect with us and join our communities, head to the show notes where you'll find our contact information and individual websites. Until next week, stay grounded, keep growing, and trust that everything you seek is unfolding for you.